This video is sponsored by Brilliant.
Hey guys, I'm Taufik. Now, if you want to write an SQL query where you want to join two or more tables, then you basically have two different ways of writing that SQL query. Now, the first way is by using the ANSI standard of joining multiple tables and then writing the query. And the second way is by using the non-ANSI standard of joining multiple tables and then writing the query. Now in this video, I'm going to be explaining you the difference between these two ways of writing SQL queries, and we will see which is a better way that you should be following to write your SQL queries. Now before I can start, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Brilliant. Brilliant is an online learning platform where you can find interactive courses related to math, science, computer science and so many others. Now the best part about Brilliant is that every single course that you find on their platform is designed to be interactive and visually appealing. So if you're someone who is a visual learner and you prefer the interactive style of learning where you get to solve multiple different puzzles and answer several different questions related to the concept that you are learning, then Brilliant is a platform that you should definitely consider. Now the other best thing about Brilliant is that you can start learning on Brilliant for free. You can just use the link that I will be sharing in the description below to sign up for free and start learning. Now the first 200 people who will be using my link will get a 20% off on your annual subscription. So definitely check that out, and thank you Brilliant for sponsoring this video. Okay, so there are two different ways of writing an SQL query. One is by using the ANSI way and the second is by using the non-ANSI way of writing an SQL query. Now, before I can show you these two ways of writing SQL query, first let's understand what ANSI is. Now, ANSI stands for American National Standards Institute, which basically is a non-profit organization which kind of maintains the common standards that different products, services, personals, processors, systems, etc. will need to follow. So you can treat ANSI like a globally accepted standard for different products, services, systems, etc. Now, SQL language was recognized as an ANSI standard, I think around 20 to 30 years back, meaning that different companies, products and databases who wish to use standard SQL formats will need to adhere to the ANSI SQL standards which are already set. This means that any RDBMS who wish to use ANSI SQL will need to follow all the ANSI SQL standards. And that is why I always say that the SQL you learn in any of the RDBMS will be applicable to any of the other RDBMS. So all of the popular RDBMS like MySQL, MS SQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL, all of these are using ANSI SQL. Okay, hopefully with this you get some basic understanding about what ANSI is. Now let's go back to seeing how to write SQL queries in two different ways. Okay, so in order to explain the two different ways of writing SQL queries, I have created four different tables. Now let's look at them. So I have the employee table which has information about 6 different employees. Then I have the department table which has information about 4 different departments. Then I have the manager information stored in the manager table and the project information stored in the project table. Okay. Now let's say you have been given a requirement where you need to fetch the employee name and the department that they belong to. Now for this particular requirement, I can write the query either in an ANSI way or in the non-ANSI way. So first let me try to write this query using the ANSI way of writing queries. So for this, I know that I need to fetch the employee name and the department. So it's basically these two tables, employee and the department. So I just need to join these two tables and fetch the data, right? So I'm just going to write a query very quickly. So I'm just going to say select from employee alias E, and I'm going to join it with, let's say I'm going to do an inner join. So whether I mention inner join or join, they basically mean inner join itself. So inner keyword is optional, but for now, just for clarity, I'll just mention inner join. Okay, so here I'll just use the table department, give an alias like D, and the join condition I'll mention it in the on clause. So I'm just going to say D dot department ID equal to E dot department ID, right? So this should be fine. Now the columns that I need to fetch are employee name comma D dot department name, right? So I think this query is fine. Now if I execute this, you can see that I'm getting the information about the 4 different employees and their department, right? Now this is fine, and this way of writing an SQL query is basically called as an ANSI way of writing an SQL query. Now, how do we know that a query is written in an ANSI format? The simple answer for that is if a query is using the join keyword. So whether it's an inner join or a left join, any outer join or any type of join. So if you're using a join keyword, then you can basically consider that query to be written in the ANSI way of writing. So whenever you're using a join keyword, we will also use the on clause to mention the join condition, right? So this
this way of writing a query which contains a join keyword and the on clause where you mention your join condition is basically termed as a ANSI way of writing SQL queries. Now there is another way of writing SQL query, and that is a non-ANSI way. Now non-ANSI is not actually an official name, but it's something like we can commonly term it like, because some of them will refer to non-ANSI as an old way of writing SQL queries, or let's say an original way of writing SQL queries, because when SQL was introduced we did not have this kind of clauses like join keyword or outer join keyword, etc. So the common way of joining tables was by using the non-ANSI way. So let's see how we can join the table using the non-ANSI way. So I'm just going to write it here. I'm just going to say non-ANSI, and instead of rewriting the whole query, right, I'm just going to reuse this, okay, just to save time. So what I'm going to do is, everything is the same. The only difference is I need to remove this join keyword. So instead of this join keyword, I'll just mention a comma, okay. So I'm joining these two tables by mentioning a comma, and then this on clause, we cannot use it because we are not using any join keyword. So instead of on, I'll just mention where. Okay, so in a non-ANSI way of writing SQL queries, we use the comma to separate between two tables, or basically join two tables, and then we mention the join condition in the where clause. Okay, so if I execute this query, you can see that the output is exactly the same. And not just that the output is same, SQL will kind of make no difference between this query and this query. So the performance will be the same. How SQL will execute these queries will also be exactly the same. So in short, right, these are the two different ways of writing SQL queries. So I can write SQL query by just using the comma to join two tables, or I can use the join keyword itself. Now, there are few advantages of writing SQL query using the ANSI method over the non-ANSI method, and I'm going to explain that with examples a little later. Okay. But before that, I just want to show you how do we add filters in both these ways. Okay, how does that work? And also I'll show you how does outer join work, because there is a slight tricky thing when it comes to outer join. Okay, so first let's see how we can add a filter in both of these ways. So let's say now if I execute this, right, okay, basically we have the output here. So I'm getting IT and HR, but let's say my requirement was only to fetch details for HR department. So I can just put a filter condition inside my where clause. So inside my ANSI way of writing SQL queries, I can also use where condition to mention the filter conditions. And here I can say d dot, let's say department name equal to HR. Okay, and if I execute this, now you can see that it's only fetching me two records, because these are the only two records where the department is HR. Right now, if I have to apply similar filter in my non-ANSI way of writing SQL queries, then also I can basically use the same filter condition. Okay, so I can just copy that whole filter condition and put it here. But the thing is, I cannot basically use a where clause again, right? Because in one SQL query, we just use one where clause, right? So here, instead of where, I just mention the and operator here, right? So now if I execute this, you can see that I'm getting the exact same output. Okay, now this is basically one of the major differences between an ANSI and a non-ANSI way. So in the ANSI way, we mention the join condition in the on clause, as you can see here, and then we mention the filter condition in the where clause. Okay, now if you are someone like me, you might ask that why do I have to use the where clause here? I can just move this to the right and mention an and clause here, and basically they should be the same, right? So if I execute this, it's basically fetching me the same output. So there is no difference, right? And the answer is yes, in this particular case, since I'm using an inner join, there is no difference. So whether I mention this filter condition in the where clause or whether I mention that filter condition inside my on clause itself, there is no difference. But when it comes to outer join, mentioning all your filter conditions and join conditions within your on clause can be a big problem. Okay, it can actually change your output completely. And I will be showing you some examples on that a little later. Okay, but for now, always remember that try to put your filter condition in the where clause and try to have your join condition in the on clause. But of course, there can be certain scenarios where you would want to have filter condition in your on clause as well, depending on what your requirement is. But that's a different thing that you need to consider. Okay, but in general, when we're using ANSI way of writing SQL queries, on clause is used to mention the join conditions and where clause is used to mention the filter condition. But when it comes to non-ANSI way of writing SQL queries, we basically cannot cannot use the on clause. We just have to mention the join condition and the filter condition, everything inside the where clause. Now, I think this is pretty simple, right? And you might think that, okay, what's the big deal in difference between these two? But trust me, there are a few additional things that you should be knowing, and I'm going to show you that very soon, okay? But before I show you some tricky part about this, let me start with the first tricky part, and that is using an outer join with non-ANSI. Okay, so let's say you had a requirement where you wanted to fetch the employees and the department. But if I go to my employee table, you can see I have 6 different employees. But this query here, so if I did not consider the filter, you can see it's only fetching me 4 employees. But let's say now you want to fetch all the employees. So let's say your requirement was fetch all the employees and the department they belong to. In this case, I cannot basically do an inner join, because when I do an inner join, some of the employees belong to department which is not present in the department table, and that is why those records will get missed out when we are doing an inner join. Okay. Now, if you want to learn more about joins, then I have made 2 separate videos about all sort of joins. So I'll leave the link to that somewhere here, or maybe you'll find it in the description below. Okay. So definitely check that out to understand joins, because I'm not going to be explaining joins in detail. But here, what we need to do is we need to fetch all the employees and their departments that they belong to. Okay, so first of all, I'll remove this filter. I don't need that. And secondly, in order to fetch all the employees, I cannot just use an inner join. I'll just need to use a left join. So either I can mention it like left join, or I can mention it like left outer join. This outer keyword is optional. Okay, for now I'll just remove this. I'll just mention it like left join. Okay, so now if I execute this query, you can see that I'm getting 6 records. Okay, this Robin and Ali were the 2 employees who were not fetched previously, but since now I'm using a left join, it's able to fetch that. Now this is fine. Okay, so using the ANSI way of writing SQL queries, we can pretty easily do any outer join, left join, right join, full outer join. Everything is pretty easy. We can just replace the keyword and the join will work as we want it to work. Okay, but when it comes to non-ANSI join, this is where it gets tricky. Okay, so in a non-ANSI join, if you are trying to write SQL queries using the non-ANSI way, and if you want to do an outer join, any type of outer join, okay, we cannot basically do it in PostgreSQL. Now I am using PostgreSQL here. In PostgreSQL, this is the limitation, or basically this is how it is designed, that we cannot write non-ANSI way of writing SQL queries when we have to do outer join. Okay, but it is allowed to do in Oracle. So what I'm going to do is I'll just copy this whole thing here and I'll move to the Oracle database. So in my system, I have a few other databases installed as well. So this is the Oracle database, and this is basically the Oracle SQL developer tool that I'm using. Okay, so I'm just going to paste it here. Now I have created the same table. It has all the same data in this Oracle database as well. Okay, so if I just execute the above query here, this is basically the ANSI way of writing the query, right, where I did a left join. You can see it's fetching me the 6 records, same like what it was fetching here. Okay, so now if I had to do a non-ANSI way of doing a left join, how I can do that is, so let me just move this a little down here. So what I can do is I'll just move this to the right, and there is one particular keyword. So I'll remove this filter. I don't need this. Now, in order to do an outer join using the non-ANSI way of writing SQL queries, we just need to use a keyword called as something like plus. Okay, so basically I just mentioned this keyword, that is plus, inside the parenthesis. Okay, so if I mention this, then SQL will understand that I'm trying to do an outer join. Okay, now why have I put it here is, the logic is that if I want to do an outer join on a particular table, then I need to specify this symbol, that is the parenthesis and plus symbol, to the opposite column. Okay, so for example, this is my join condition, right? So in this my join condition, this is the first column. Basically, I'm joining the department ID column from the department table with the department ID column from the employee table, right? Now, if I want to do an outer join on the employee table, then I mention this symbol on the other side. Okay, that is, I mention it here. If I mention this symbol here, then it will basically do an outer join on the department table. Okay, I hope you understand. So for now, let me execute this and let's see the output. So if I execute this, you can see I'm getting again the same output, these 6 records, right? So let's say if I removed this plus, this basically that symbol, and if I ran this, now SQL will basically treat it like an inner join because I'm not using that plus symbol, right? So let's say if I put that plus symbol here, Okay, that is in the place where I'm fetching the column from the employee table. So in this case, since I put the plus symbol here, the outer join will happen on the opposite table. So the opposite table here is, this is the employee table column, the opposite table is department, so the outer join will happen on this. So kind of like a right outer join. So if I execute this, it will basically fetch me, so if I execute this, it will basically fetch me all the columns from the right table. So you can see that all the 4 departments are fetched. Right, so this is basically how we can do an outer join using the non-ANSI way of writing SQL queries. Okay, so it's a little tricky. If you have never used it, then you might find it a little tricky, but I hope you understand. So you don't need to mention left or right. Basically, there is no way to mention right or left keyword, right? So the only way SQL will understand whether you're trying to do a left outer join or a right outer join is based on where you place this symbol. Now the problem is, if I try to copy the same query here and move it to PostgreSQL, so I'm in PostgreSQL now, and if I try to run this here, right, now it's going to throw me an error because this symbol of plus is actually not supported, because in PostgreSQL, using the non-ANSI way, I cannot do outer joins. And the same is true for MySQL and Microsoft SQL Server as well. Okay, so both in MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, or PostgreSQL, or any other RDBMS, non-ANSI way is still supported. We can still join the table using the comma, but outer join is not supported. So the outer join is only supported, I think, in Oracle. I'm not sure about if there are any other RDBMS who supports outer join in non-ANSI. If there is, maybe I will like to know. You can leave a comment below. But I hope you understand, this is how we can do outer join using non-ANSI way, just by using this particular symbol. Okay, and the position of where you place this symbol is basically going to tell the SQL whether you want to do a left join or a right join. Okay, so I hope all of this is clear. You basically kind of understand what is the difference between these two ways of writing SQL queries. Now let's discuss about why I say that ANSI way of writing SQL queries is better, and you should always write SQL queries using this ANSI way. Okay, now I'm going to give you 4 main advantages of using ANSI way over the non-ANSI way, and I'm going to explain you these advantages with some examples. Okay, so the first advantage of using an ANSI way of writing SQL query over the non-ANSI way is, the SQL queries using the ANSI way will be shorter, it will be cleaner, and it will be more easier to read, understand, and debug. Okay, so in order to explain this, right, let's do one thing. I'm going to write another query. So let's say I have a requirement something like this. So I need to fetch all the employees, all the managers, their department and projects. Okay, so if I look at this query properly, I need to write a query which should basically fetch all the employees, and it should also fetch all the managers. Now just by looking at this table data, right, I know there are certain employees whose department may not be present in the department table, and then I know there are certain managers who basically do not have any employees under them. Okay, but my query should fetch everything. So basically I will need to use multiple outer joins to write this query. So let me quickly write this query. I'm not going to explain in detail about this query, but I hope you will understand when I'm trying to write this step by step. So I'm just going to say select from my employee table given alias E, then I'm going to do a left join. So left join with the department table given alias D, and I'm going to use the join condition like D dot department ID equal to E dot department ID. This basically is the same query until this point what we wrote previously, right? Next comes that I need to join the manager table. Now when I'm joining the manager table, I cannot just do a left join because my intention is to fetch all the managers. So I basically need to fetch all the records from the manager as well. So for that, I'll do a right join here. So I'll do right join manager given alias M. I'll say M dot manager ID. I think it is manager ID equal to E dot manager ID. Okay, and finally I also need to fetch all the projects, and I know that the project is present in the projects table. So in this case I'll just use the left join. So I'll say left join projects P, and I'll say P dot, I think, team member ID equal to E dot employee ID. Right, so I think all of this join should basically work, and the columns that I need to fetch is E dot emp name, that is the employee name, and I need to fetch the D dot department name, and then I need to fetch, I think it is the manager name, I'm not sure, so let's check. Yes, manager name, and then I think in the projects table I have project name, right? So I'm just going to say P dot project name. Okay, so if I just execute this query, okay, I'm getting some error. Let's try to fix this. Team member ID. So I think this is a typo. Now let me execute this, and you can see I'm getting the output. And if I just expand this, You can see I'm getting 8 different records. Now if I look at this data carefully, you can see that these are all the employees and I'm getting their department information, etc. But for this particular manager, Corey, you can see I'm not getting any employee or the department information because this is a manager who does not have any employees. Okay, and similarly these are the two employees whose department basically is not present in the department table, hence the department is null, and so on and so forth. So basically looks like this data that I have got is correct. Okay, so basically I have written the query, and as I told you, when I'm using this join keyword and mentioning the join condition in the on keyword or the on clause, then this way of writing SQL query is the ANSI way. Okay, but let's say if I had to write the same query using the non-ANSI way, how do I do that? Right, so okay, I cannot basically do the outer join using the non-ANSI way in PostgreSQL. I will need to do it in Oracle. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this to Oracle. So I'll just remove maybe all of this. I'll put it here. So let's see how I can convert this query into a non-ANSI way of writing SQL query. So I'll just copy the whole thing and I'll just paste it here. So I'll say non-ANSI and I'll just paste it here. So here, in order to convert it into a non-ANSI, first thing is I'll put a where condition here because everything that I have mentioned in the on clause, right, it needs to go into my where condition. So I'll just put it here and all the conditions. So I'll just copy everything. I'll put it here. The left and the right joins, I'll just look at this at the end. Okay. And then again, I'll put another and condition here and I'll mention this on clause also here. Okay. And I'll remove this on clause. I don't need it because I'm using the non-ANSI way, and then I need to replace this left join with a comma, right? Every join keyword with a comma, right? So I'm just going to copy this and do the same thing for projects as well. Okay, so what I have basically done is I have mentioned all of these multiple tables. I have joined them, but I have mentioned just a comma in between them to do the join, and then I have mentioned the join condition in my where clause. Now if I just execute this like this, then everything will be an inner join because I'm not using that plus symbol, right? But I know that some tables I need to do left join, some table I need to do right join, right? So now let's try to implement that. So if I just move this down, and let's look at the first table. So here my join condition is for department and employee, and I know that department and employee I'm doing a left join. So join, basically my outer join is based on employee table. So since my outer join is on the employee table, I need to mention this symbol on the opposite side. So I'll mention it near my department table column. Right, so the next is I'm joining the manager table with the employee table. So here I'm right join on manager, so my outer join is on the manager table. So my manager table column is here, so my outer join should be here. So I'm just going to plus this, mention this plus symbol here, and then finally my projects table is here. I'm doing a left join with the employee table, so my outer join is on the employee table. So I mentioned this symbol on the opposite side of the employee column, that is here. Okay, hopefully if I execute this, I should still get the same output that I got previously, that is 8 records, right? So let me execute this, and you can see that I'm still getting the 8 records. So again, if I execute the ANSI way of writing this query, you can see that I'm still getting the same output. Okay, now let me just minimize this and let me just show you these two queries. Now I told you that the first advantage of using the ANSI way is the queries will be shorter, it will be cleaner, and it will be easier to understand, okay, and also to debug. Now you can just see with this simple example, this query here using the ANSI way, it's just 5 lines long. So this is just 5 lines query, whereas this query that I have written here, I think it is 8 lines. So this is 8 lines long. Both the queries are doing exactly the same thing. SQL will treat it exactly the same, but the ANSI way of writing query is much shorter than the non-ANSI way. Now this is a simple query. When you write more complex SQL queries, it will kind of be still evident that how shorter you can make a query by using the ANSI way of writing SQL queries. Okay, and also this query, that is the ANSI way of writing SQL query, is much cleaner, right? Because here you are easily mentioned left join. So just by looking at these two tables, I can tell that which table is joining with which table on what is the type of join. So it's a left join, it's a right join, it's a left join here, right? And on which column the join is happening is also mentioned here. So everything is very neat and clear. But when it comes to this non-ANSI way, you have this symbol. It's kind of very confusing to know what does this symbol mean. So like this outer join is happening on which column. Now if you look carefully, you will understand, but you can easily see that this way of writing query is much more easier to understand than this query. And trust me, when you're writing SQL queries which are hundreds and hundreds of lines long, and if you're writing the query in this way, way, then it's going to be very difficult for you to debug and to rectify any issues. It's also going to, there will be certain scenarios which basically you may not be able to solve the query itself using this way of doing outer join by using the non-ANSI method. Okay, so this is the first advantage. The queries will be much shorter, much cleaner and easier to understand. Now the second advantage of using ANSI way of writing SQL query over the non-ANSI way is that in an ANSI way, you mention the join condition inside the on clause and you mention the filter condition inside the where clause. So there are separate sections for join conditions and separate sections for filter condition. Now this can be pretty handy, okay, and I'm going to show you with an example. So let's say now, okay, I'm going to remove this query and I'm going to have this the other query which we just wrote previously. So what this query is doing is I'm just joining the employee table with the department table using a left join. So I'll just remove this outer and I'm doing the join based on the department ID. So if I execute this, it's going to fetch me all the employees and the corresponding departments, right? Now this is fine, but let's say if I had a requirement where I need to fetch these details only when the department is HR, only for the HR department, then I can just put a where condition or basically the filter condition here saying that d dot department name equal to HR, right? Exactly what we did previously, right? So if I execute this, now you can see it's only fetching me 2 records and this is fine. But as I explained you previously, some of you might be thinking, why should I mention the filter condition separately? Why can't I just mention this filter condition in my on clause itself? Okay, previously we were doing an inner join, so we did not see any difference. But let's say now instead of the where clause, if I just move this right, I don't have to move this right, but just to make it very clear, if I just mention an on and clause here, okay, and let me just move this on to the right here. Okay, so okay, I'll do one thing. I'll just copy the same query here, okay, 2 different ways, just so that it becomes easier to explain. Okay, and here let's say I have the where. Okay, so here what I'm doing is if I execute, I'm getting these 2 records because I'm using the where. So inside my where I'm using I'm mentioning the filter condition, and inside my on clause I'm mentioning the join condition. Now as some of you might have thought, why simply have where clause? Why can't I put everything inside the on clause? And for that I just put everything inside the on clause. So I have my filter condition inside the on clause and I have my join condition inside my on clause itself. And now if I execute, right, you can see that the output is different. Now you can see this query is fetching 6 records. It looks like both these queries are exactly the same. Only thing is this filter condition I mentioned inside the and, basically the on clause, and here the filter condition I mentioned inside the where clause. So how did the output differ? The reason for that is when you are using an outer join, how SQL will execute the query is first it will do all the joins, right? So in this particular case, when SQL executing this query, it will first do the left join. So from the left join, it will fetch these 6 records. So from over this 6 records, it will apply this filter. So from this 6 records, it will see where the department name is HR, and only those 2 records will get returned from this query. Okay, so this is why you're getting only 2 records, because the where condition is kind of a filter. Any records that do not match this where clause will get removed from your output. Right, so that is why only those records which match this where condition, that is this filter that you have mentioned in the where condition, will be returned. But when it comes to the second query here, right, what happens is, first of all, there is no filter condition. So, and here we are just doing a left join. So when we are doing a left join, what it means is, as I told you in one of my previous videos where I explained join, left join will first do an inner join, and then additionally it will go to the leftmost table and fetch for any additional records, right? So in this particular case, it will first see which are the records it is matching. So it will check for this matching departments, and whatever is fetched, it will fetch it, and it will also look for which are the departments where it is HR. Okay, so when I execute this, you can see that these are the only 2 records which will kind of match both these conditions. So the department is HR and the department ID is matching. Okay, but after it does this, it will all, because I'm trying to do a left join, it will go to the leftmost table and fetch every single record that was not part of the inner join. Okay, so that is why, irrespective of what filter conditions you have given here, whatever number of records are present in the left table, all the records will be returned. Okay, and that is why this query will return all the records from the employee table, whether this join condition is successful or not. Okay, so that is the difference. So this is why I always tell that when you are trying to use this ANSI way of writing SQL queries, and especially when you are using an outer join, try to make sure that you put your filter condition in the where clause and try to put your join condition in the on clause. Okay, now of course there can be certain scenarios when you would still want to put the filter condition in your on clause. Now that's a different thing, but this is the main purpose of ANSI, and this is why ANSI is better. But when it comes to non ANSI, you don't have this kind of feature. Basically you cannot use the on clause, everything has to be in the where clause, right? So this is a second advantage of using ANSI. Now coming to the third advantage of using an ANSI way of writing SQL query over the non ANSI is that using ANSI you can avoid accidental cross joins. Okay, so what I mean by cross join is whenever you basically join two tables, and if you do not specify a join condition, then you basically what you're telling SQL is to join every record from the left table with every record from the right table, and this is what we call as a cross join, right? So let's say in this particular query that we previously wrote, right? So here I am basically doing multiple joins, multiple outer joins, and if I execute, I'm getting, I think, 8 records, right? So if I just do up, yeah, you can see I'm getting 8 records, right? But let's say by mistake, I just forgot to join the manager table with the employee table. So my join condition between the manager and the employee table is just this particular line, right? So let's say I'll just comment it out. Okay, for now I'm just commenting it out, but imagine you just forgot to mention this join condition. Okay, and if I execute this query, the query will still execute. Okay, so it will still execute, it will still fetch the output, it's not going to throw an error, but the output is wrong. You can see that previously it was 8 records, now it is fetching 28 records, and the reason for that is it's basically doing a cross join between the manager and the employee table because you have not specified any join condition. And this is the kind of issues that a lot of people do when you are trying to write SQL queries using non ANSI method. Okay, but if I had to do the same issue with the, let's say, ANSI method, and if I forgot to mention the join condition here, that is between the manager and the employee, and if I try to execute this query, basically it is going to throw me an error saying that you have to specify the on clause. So when you're trying to write a query using the ANSI way, you have to specify this on clause, and generally when you're specifying this on clause, this is where you will give your join condition. So the chances of you forgetting to provide a join condition will be much less when compared to the non ANSI method. Okay, so this is the third advantage of why you should be using the ANSI method of writing SQL queries. Now the fourth and the final advantage that I can tell you on why you should always be using the ANSI way of writing SQL query is ANSI is universally accepted by all the RDBMS and systems. Okay, so once you learn to write SQL queries using the ANSI standard, then basically you can work on any RDBMS. Right? So this is also a very big advantage of why you should learn how to write SQL queries using the ANSI way of writing. Okay, so that's all I had to tell about ANSI and non ANSI. I hope this video was useful, and every single script that I have mentioned in this video or I have written in this video, right, I will be sharing it in my Discord server. So if you have not joined my Discord, I'll leave the link to my Discord in the description below, so you can join my Discord and you can find all of these scripts there. Okay, so thank you guys, and see you soon in the next one. Bye.